Hi, welcome. My name is Sean Purcell. I am a sales leader and coach here at Compass. I'm out of the San Diego region. And today I wanted to go over with you the contracts flow chart that we created. This was kind of out of necessity with all the lawsuits and all the new contracts, and it was really difficult to have it make sense in our heads. I know I was teaching the classes and thinking, I need something to help me relate these. And I told the agents what I was thinking, and they said, yes, that would be a huge help. So after a little bit of work and some great consultation with other managers and our amazing broker, Kathy, we have this flow chart for you. I'm not going to go into the contracts themselves. I mean, you're doing contract classes for that, I hope. This is more about how they relate to each other and why we're using them. I'm a big believer in the give a person a fish, they eat for a day. Teach a person to fish, they eat for the rest of their lifetime. Well, I think we teach why the fish are biting over here and not over there. And now we live like kings and queens for the rest of our life. So let's do that. The first page that you're going to see is actually the last page in the handout, but it's the key. Just showing you we have one. All the acronyms stand for different contracts. There's a little description in there. That is not the official CAR definition of the contract. Please don't hold me responsible. It's a little reminder of what that contract is doing. This also is not all the contracts necessary in a transaction. We're just looking at the new ones and how they relate. All right, fair enough. Let's start with the open house. Open houses traditionally were held to help sell the home, although it doesn't happen that often, and to meet new clients. Well, we have an issue now because the new rules say you cannot tour a home without an existing contract with that potential buyer that lays out what the compensation will be between the buyer and the buyer's brokerage. So how do you have people come into an open house? There's no contract there. That's why they created the OHNASI, the Open House Visitor Non-Agency Disclosure and Sign-In. Isn't that a mouthful? Here's how I think about it. When you have people come into your open house, you want them to have an amazing experience. You want it to be almost Zen-like. So when they walk in, you give them the onasi. The onasi is basically the person walking in, putting their name on a form. They're not signing. We shouldn't use that term. But they're acknowledging that you are not their agent, that they wish to tour this home. They do not have a relationship with you. They don't look at you as their buyer's agent, and that you are there to represent the seller. It's a big acknowledgement, which in the end allows us to tour the home without the agreement between a buyer and a buyer's broker. As long as they put their name on there, you can tell them about the home. You can act on the seller's behalf to get that home sold. By the way, what happens if they don't put their name on there? Do we stand at the door like bouncers, can't come in? Well, maybe if that's what your seller directs you to do. Generally speaking, if they don't want to put their name on that form, then you're going to allow them in, but you're going to tell them, I can't really answer any questions. Here's the flyer I created. I could read this to you, but that's about all I can say, because you not putting your name on there means I can't really speak other than what's in the collateral that I brought. That's fine. If they don't want to put their name, that's fine. Some people don't like that. For those who do, you're speaking to them as the seller's agent. If you're not the listing agent, you're there on behalf of the listing agent. Now, what happens if the buyer starts asking questions that aren't necessarily about this home? For instance, what if they say, this home really isn't for us, but we do like the neighborhood. Do you know what else is for sale? Now we've got an issue. Now you're technically touring a home, and we're back to doing it without a contract. So something has to happen. You could say, fantastic, I'd love to chat with you about that. I don't feel I can give you the full attention you need while I'm here at this open house. Let's meet in half an hour at the local coffee shop. Generally, we don't like letting people go, though, if we're starting a good rapport, right? I suppose you could walk outside. You could stand on the sidewalk. Technically, you're not touring the home anymore. What we should be doing is getting one of these two contracts signed. There's the BRBC, that's the Buyer Representation and Broker Compensation Agreement. That's the big daddy. That's the one we want to use when we're definitely working with a buyer. It can be both exclusive and non-exclusive, and I'm going to go into that on the next slide. The other one, the one that's more likely to be used in an open house, is the PSRA. That's the property showing and representation agreement. It's kind of a big buyer broker agreement light, right? It's the BRBC light. It can only be used for up to 3 properties, and maybe it's just that property, just the property you're holding open, because the buyer's talking to you about being interested in it, but now from a purchase point of view. And you're thinking you might want to help them with that. Well, you need an agreement in place. It's only good for 30 days, and it is non-exclusive, meaning you're only going to get paid if there's broker involvement, which is defined in the contracts classes, when seeing the home. Those are the 2 big differences. If you're going to talk to them about representing them in buying the home, or about any other homes that are available, you need to either sign one of these contracts or you need to leave the property. All right, let's say that we do develop them or anyone else into a potential buyer. Fantastic. First thing we're going to do is have a buyer consultation. We're doing that because, remember, we can't go see properties anymore without an agreement in place, a contract in place like the BRBC. So in that consultation, the first thing you're going to want to show them is the Broker Compensation Advisory, the BCA. By far the best written thing that's come out of all of this. It does a really good job of explaining how each broker gets paid, what the changes are. It's something you should be going through with every single client, no matter what part of the transaction we're in. So we review that. Once we've reviewed that and we've done the consultation and we're getting ready to do the contract, we have to negotiate a compensation. That was a big end result of these lawsuits, was that the buyer and the buyer's broker should be negotiating a compensation between them. You're going to either put that on the BRBC or the PSRA, the 2 contracts from before. Now, normally you'd want to use the BRBC. Again, that's the buyer representation and broker compensation. That's just like taking a listing. It's written as non-exclusive, but there would be almost no reason you would ever fill out that contract without checking the box and making it exclusive. Just like you would never take a listing that's non-exclusive. This spells out the type of home they're looking for and the compensation you're going to receive and the time period for all of it, which I believe cannot exceed 90 days. That's the agreement that we want to reach. We want to have that level of trust and create that level of agreement with our buyer. Okay, so now we have a buyer and we're looking at properties and we have a buyer representation agreement in place. That moves us to the purchase, and you can see the tree gets bigger. What's the first thing we do? That's right, we go over that BCA again. We want to make sure that our clients understand who's getting paid and how. One of the things that we're going to find, we'll talk about it right now as a matter of fact, in that BRBC that you've signed, there's a place where your client can check a box saying, I don't have the funds to pay you. They've agreed that you should be paid whatever compensation you've negotiated. I'm going to use 3% just as an example. I agree that you're worth 3% and I'm going to pay you 3%, except checkbox, I can't pay that. But I'm authorizing you to go negotiate that with the seller on my behalf. That's going to become important as we go through the purchase. So we go through the BCA. Then, which kind of property are we looking at? Probably a listed property, right? But it could be a for sale by owner. So both of those are in the flow chart. If it's a for sale by owner, the first thing you're going to do is send them a seller non-agency. Once you've started communications, you're going to have them sign this form saying that they recognize that you are not acting on their behalf. You are there to represent the buyer. You're going to ask whether it's the for sale by owner or if it's listed, the listing agent, you're going to ask if compensation or concessions are being offered. Most of the time, my bet is that you're going to hear, yes, the seller's open to concessions. Send in your offer, make your request, and we'll negotiate, because all compensation is negotiable. But from time to time, you might hear a specific number. The seller may insist on offering 2%. I don't want to just be open to concessions. I'm going to offer 2% to the buyer's broker. Or the for sale by owner might say that. Either way, we no longer have an MLS contractually obligating the seller to the amount they just told us verbally. So how do you get that in writing? How do you make sure that that's what they're going to pay? You send them the SP, the Single Party Compensation Agreement. So again, the SP is going to be used when you want in writing a specific amount that the seller has said that they will pay. The SP basically aligns a seller and a brokerage, irrespective of agency, but in this case, we would be the buyer's agent, a certain compensation if a certain property sells to a certain buyer in a certain time frame. It's all very specific. Now, what about most of the time when they just say the seller's open to concessions, depends on your offer? Now we would go through the more normal process. We're going to do a purchase agreement with an SPBB. The SPBB is the seller payment to buyer's broker. Very simple, one page. What it's saying is the buyer and the buyer's broker have come to an agreement, probably the BRBC, and it calls for this much compensation, and we are asking you, the seller, to pay that. Now, if that's what's happening, then in the RPA, you're going to check box 3G3. 3G3 is what tells the seller, as part of the offer, that there is an SPBB attached, and that the buyer is asking the seller to pay their obligation to the buyer's broker. Once that's been discussed, and it becomes a negotiation. The seller may say yes, no, change the price. The buyer may say yes, no. You're going to negotiate it like you would always negotiate. Now, we have to add one thing to this. What happens if we've gotten into a situation where the buyers told us they can't pay, and we've had a conversation with them about looking at homes that aren't offering, or they say they're offering, but they change their mind? We can't work for free. We can't do this for no compensation. Our E&O doesn't allow it, among other things, but it's not a business model. We're going to have to pack away. That's a very tough conversation to have. We need to have that before we ever start looking at homes. But for some reason, we got into a situation where we've written an offer, we've started negotiations, and it's not going to work. The compensation, if any, is going to be zero or below an acceptable amount for you to take on the liability and the work involved. At that point, you need to fill out a COBRA. That's the cancellation of buyer representation. The COBRA can be done in general, meaning as buyer and buyer's broker, we're now splitting completely. Or it can just take that specific property out and say, I cannot represent you on this property. I'm sure there's a whole host of questions that go with that. They're beyond what we're doing here, but you're going to see in your contracts classes or talk to your manager how to handle that situation. That's going to be an outlier, but it could happen, and we need to know the next step. Okay, one more thing we need to look at, the listing. How are we doing listings differently? Well, first of all, there's our old friend, the BCA. Definitely go over the broker compensation advisory with your sellers so that they also understand what's happening. Then you're going to have a number of conversations with your seller. One of the conversations will be, are they open to offering concessions or compensation? By the way, these are two different things, right? Let's make very clear. Compensation is a fee paid for professional services offered, for instance, for a real estate broker. Concessions are a credit offered to the buyer to cover closing costs, which may include broker compensation, but it can never be earmarked for that. Either the seller's offering a concession, a credit to the buyer to use as they see fit, or they're offering an actual compensation that they're agreeing to give to the brokerage directly, or they could be doing both. But we need to understand the differences. And your seller needs to understand the differences. And then you're going to talk to them about buyer pools. How many buyers are out there? Ask your seller, hey, you remember when you bought this home? You remember all that loose change you had lying around? You were wondering whether to take a vacation or buy a brand new car? No, you don't remember that, because every dollar you had went into buying the home. Well, same thing goes still today. Most buyers do not have the necessary money, the necessary extra to pay their broker, and they're probably going to be asking you to offer a concession or direct compensation. That's about as far as we're going to go. They can be open to it. They can think about it. They can look at what's happening in the market and then look at the offers they get and decide what they want to do. So we do a residential listing agreement where we negotiate our compensation for selling the home. You're also going to talk about that unrepresented buyer, what really should be called a self-represented buyer, someone who's coming in saying, I don't have an agent, I don't want an agent, I'm representing myself, and here's my offer. That is going to take extra work on your part, and the liability is infinitely high because you're now going to have to help but not establish agency, a very tricky line to walk. So you would expect some form of compensation from your seller for that. Your seller may say to you, I don't want you helping. I don't want you handing any forms over whatsoever. It's the seller's decision. With the RPA, the RLA, the Residential Listing Agreement, there's also the Multiple Listing Service Addendum. This is a new form that's part of the listing. It takes a lot of information that was in the listing agreement to begin with, having to do with MLS and photographs and things like that. Not marketing for a while where we use a SELM. Those things all moved over to the MLSA, along with paragraph 5B, the box that a seller would check saying, I authorize you, the listing broker, to advertise and market the fact that I'm open to concessions. Not obligated, but open. That's where they would put that. So a very, very important box. Now, if the seller insists on offering a specific amount, which is generally not going to be in their best interest, but they may, we're going to have a tough time backing that up. We have what's called, if you're with Compass and watching this, we have the Compass ARLA, the Addendum to Residential Listing Agreement, which I think initially may have helped us with that. It was a place for the seller to say, I will. But it was realized legally that that doesn't work. We can't obligate the seller to pay someone else. So it went back to a I'm open to, which really means even if your seller insists they want to pay a specific amount, you're going to have to think long and hard about how you want to market that, or if you want to market that at all, because it's not backed anywhere. Seller could change their mind. Now, where the Compass ARLA does come in handy is on your existing contracts, where this isn't in our flow chart, but when you're doing, for instance, the DMLA, which is changing your current existing listing agreements into compliant listing agreements, that might be a good place for them to also note if they want to offer specific compensation, and more importantly, that they want you to market that they're open. Because there won't be a 5B, that new box on the MLSA. You won't have that if you're converting an existing agreement into a compliant agreement. So the Compass ARLA also acts as authorization for you to market that they're open to offering some concession. After that, offers arrive, and if it's agent represented, you go into your negotiations. If it's seller self-represented, if it's a buyer saying I'm representing myself, one last contract, the buyer non-agency, the BNA, make sure and give that to the buyer. They need to sign that, acknowledging that you are not representing them, you are only representing the seller. All right, that is a relatively quick overview, even though it's almost 20 minutes, of the new contracts. If you have questions, the managers are all here to help. There's contracts classes continuing to go on. And of course, you can always reach out to me. That's it. Have a great day. Go out there and negotiate. Take care of clients.